There are people who walk into a room and change the temperature of it, not loudly, not by demanding attention or performing for the people around them, simply by being so completely, so specifically, so unapologetically themselves that everyone else in the room becomes slightly more awake. Eve Callahan was one of those people. She was 26 years old, Irish, a scholarship student at Oxford, first in her family, first from her school, which had thrown a small assembly in her honor when the acceptance letter arrived. An event she described once with a mortification so genuine and so precise that the man listening to her laughed for considerably longer than she found appropriate. She studied music. She played piano the way some people breathe, not for performance, not for approval, but for the simple necessary reason that the alternative was unthinkable. And the first thing she ever said to the man who would become her husband was not hello. It was not what's your name, or can I help you, or any of the civilized preliminary exchanges that adults use to acknowledge each other before deciding whether to invest further. She looked up from her book, 1 second, the specific, evaluating look of a woman who had decided very early in life that her attention was a finite and serious resource. And she said, "Sit down and share it, or come back in an hour." He sat down. He did not leave for 2 hours and 17 minutes. He came back the next day, and the day after, and every day for 3 weeks. Until one evening, she looked up at closing time and said, without ceremony, "There's a pub on the corner. I'm going. You can come if you want." He went. And what happened between these two people, in libraries and pubs, in a small house in Ireland, in a register office on a Tuesday morning, is one of the most remarkable love stories you will ever hear. This is the story of Eve Callahan, and it begins here. His name was Oliver Barrett, 24 years old. Third-year law at Oxford, which tells you nearly everything about the shape of the life that had been quietly assembled around him without anyone asking whether he wanted it. 3 generations of the same college, the same subject, the same inherited certainty that the world had been arranged specifically to accommodate men like him. His father had a study that smelled of old leather and older decisions already made on your behalf. Oliver had at 24, without ever choosing any of it, the education and the name and the particular unexamined confidence of a man who has never once been required to justify himself. He had also, though he would not have admitted this to anyone including himself, absolutely no idea what he actually wanted from a single day of his life. That was the man who walked into the Bodleian Library on a Thursday afternoon in October, looking for a specific case study, found it missing from the shelf, turned around, and found Eve at a table by the window, with the book open in front of her. She had a pen behind each ear, a notebook beside her, written in a hand so precise it looked architectural. She had been playing piano since she was 4 years old in a small house in Clare, with a second-hand upright and a mother who recognized something in the child at the keys and quietly rearranged the entire household budget to keep the lessons going. Oliver did not know any of this yet. What he knew was that she had the book, that she had told him to sit down or come back in an hour, and that he had sat down. After about 40 minutes of sitting across from a woman who had not once acknowledged his continued presence, he said, "I'm Oliver." She glanced up. "I know." He blinked. "You know, you're Oliver Barrett, Pemberton Seminar, Thursday mornings, third row. You ask good questions and then immediately look around to see if anyone noticed they were good." She looked back at her page. He sat very still. "That's," he said carefully, "an extremely precise observation." "I notice things," she said. Not unkindly, simply as a statement of fact, the way you might say, "I take my coffee black," or "I prefer the window seat." "Eve Callahan," she said, still reading, "since we're doing this." "I know," he said. She did look up then. One eyebrow lifted approximately 2 millimeters. It was, he would come to understand, the Eve Callahan equivalent of a standing ovation. "Good," she said. "Now be quiet. I have 40 minutes left." He was quiet. He came back the next day. She looked up, said "you" again, and returned to her notebook. On the scale of human welcomes, it barely registered. He was absurdly, disproportionately pleased by it. He came back every day for 3 weeks. She was there each time, same table, same two pens, same absolute refusal to treat his arrival as an event requiring any particular response. It was, he would later describe it, the most compelling thing anyone had ever done to him. Being consistently cheerfully, entirely unimpressed by him, he had never experienced it before. He found he could not stop coming back for more of it. On the Wednesday of the third week, she looked up at closing time and said, "There's a pub on the corner. I'm going. You can come if you want." They talked for 4 hours. Not a pleasant conversation that happened to last 4 hours. The kind of talking that has gears, that builds, takes corners at speed, ends up somewhere neither person expected to be. Eve talked about music the way poets talk about language, as though the subject were inexhaustible, as though studying it were a way of studying everything else that mattered. She had opinions about buildings and history and the specific ethical weight of inheriting wealth you did nothing to earn. She asked questions that made Oliver feel simultaneously understood and gently, precisely accountable. Nobody had ever made him feel accountable before. He walked back to college at midnight in the October cold with the specific disoriented feeling of a man who has just discovered that a room he thought he knew has a door he never noticed. He went to bed. He lay awake for a long time, and somewhere in the quiet of that night he understood, with the clarity of something that has been true for a while and has only just been permitted to surface. He was going to fall in love with Eve Callahan. He had probably already started. There was a practice room in the music faculty, small, slightly cold. A piano with two keys slightly out of tune that Eve had reported 3 times to facilities management and which remained stubbornly, magnificently out of tune for their entire time at Oxford. She played there most evenings, 9 to 11. Oliver knew this because he walked past on a Thursday night, heard something through the door, and stood in the corridor for 22 minutes. She was playing something he had no vocabulary for, something that moved between a formal structure and something more private, like a conversation that kept drifting from its official topic into something more honest. What he could tell you, if you asked him about it years later, was what it felt like from that corridor. It felt like overhearing someone's truest thought, like something he was not supposed to hear and could not walk away from. She opened the door and found him there. "Were you standing there the whole time?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He had learned already that lying to Eve was a strategy you attempted once and abandoned permanently. She looked at him. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in, I'll play it again." She played it again. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall. There was no chair, and she had not offered to share the bench, which was deliberate, he understood later. She wanted to watch his face while she played. She wanted to know if he heard it the way she meant it. Afterwards, she said, "Well?" "I don't have the right words," he said. "What did it make you feel?" He thought about it genuinely, not a habit he had previously cultivated, thinking about things genuinely before answering them. Then he said, "Like there was a room in a house I thought I knew, and I just found the door." A silence. "That's the right answer," she said. This is how Eve worked. Approval was not something she performed when she didn't mean it. When she told you that you had said the right thing, it landed like a verdict that had been properly considered and could be trusted. Oliver became, over the weeks that followed, slightly addicted to earning it. She changed his mind regularly and without mercy. He had a view, casual, unexamined, the kind that survives only because no one has ever challenged it. He expressed it at dinner one evening. Eve waited until he finished. Then she asked 4 questions, each building on the last, until the position collapsed entirely under its own weight. She picked up her fork and continued eating. "Too long," she said without looking up. "You'll do better." He did. She made him want to think carefully, not about what people thought of him, but about whether he was actually right. No one had ever shown him those were different questions. He went to Ireland with her at Christmas, a small house in County Clare, her parents, Declan and Bridget, her 2 brothers, a fire that had apparently been burning in some form since the 1980s, and a warmth entirely foreign to everything Oliver had grown up inside. Declan played fiddle badly and with tremendous conviction, and received all criticism on this point with cheerful, complete disregard. Bridget fed people with the focused moral seriousness of someone who considers hunger a personal insult. The house smelled of turf smoke and something always baking, and the comfortable, specific chaos of a family that had chosen to be exactly where it was. Oliver had grown up in houses where dinner was an occasion and silence was a form of good manners. He sat at the Callahan's kitchen table and ate more than he had eaten in a single sitting in years, and listened to Eve argue cheerfully with her father about a film neither of them had liked and he understood. With a certainty that arrived in the chest before it arrived anywhere else, what a home that had chosen itself felt like. Not inherited, not arranged, built daily, deliberately, by people who meant every brick of it. Declan caught Oliver watching his daughter across the table, the way you watch someone when you think no one is looking, and said nothing. He just smiled and refilled Oliver's glass. Later, walking back from the village in the dark with the Atlantic somewhere out to the west of them, audible but invisible, Eve said, "My dad likes you. How can you tell? He refilled your glass without being asked." A pause. "He hasn't done that for anyone I've brought home before." Oliver stopped walking. "How many people have you brought home before?" She kept walking. "One," she said. "He didn't get his glass refilled." He stood there in the Irish dark for a moment. Then he caught up. He called his father that evening from outside the house. He said, "Fine." He said, "Visiting a friend." He did not say Eve, did not say Ireland, understanding instinctively that those two words arriving at his father's ear together would produce a response he was not yet equipped to handle. Eve saw his face when he came back inside. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Fine," he said. She looked at him the way she looked at arguments that hadn't earned the right to be taken seriously. "We'll talk about it later," she said. Not a question. They talked about it later. Oliver told her all of it. His father's expectations, the life assembled around him without his input, what it meant to be the third generation of the same name, doing the same thing in the same place. Eve listened without interrupting, which was unusual. She thought quickly and had opinions and normally saw no reason to delay either. That night she just listened. And then she said, "What do you want, Oliver? Not what's been arranged. What do you actually want?" He looked at her across the kitchen table in that small Clare house at 11 at night, her family's voices coming softly through the wall, the fire going, the fiddle on the wall, the smell of turf smoke under the door. He thought, this exact place, this exact person. This is the closest he had ever come to an answer to that question. He didn't say it. He wasn't ready. She saw it anyway. She always saw it. Oliver brought Eve to his family's house in Wiltshire in February. The version of this story that makes his father a villain is simpler but not true. He was not cruel. He was not loud. He did not say ugly things at the dinner table or make anyone feel unwelcome with words. He was polite. If you have never been on the receiving end of that particular English upper-class politeness, the kind extended to someone whose presence is considered a problem to be managed rather than a person to be known, the word might sound like a reasonable thing. It is not. It is a closed door dressed as an open one, a welcome mat that does not mean it. He asked Eve careful questions. He listened with composed attention that never once shifted into genuine interest. He complimented her scholarship in the tone of a man complimenting the weather in a country he has no intention of visiting. During dinner, he looked at Oliver 5 times and at Eve once. Eve was magnificent. She answered every question with the precise degree of warmth it deserved, considerably less than she normally brought into a room. Not cold, exact. She matched the interest being offered and did not perform beyond it. The effect was that his father kept extending a little more effort to reach her, and every time he extended it, she simply received it without moving toward him. By the end of the evening, he had leaned further in her direction than he intended. She had not moved an inch. She told Oliver in the car, "He's going to make this difficult." "I know. Are you ready for that?" He looked at the dark Wiltshire lanes, his family's history pressing in on every side. "No," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." She said nothing. She put her hand over his on the gear stick and left it there for the rest of the drive. She did not tell him it would be all right. She did not say he was doing the right thing. She kept her hand there steady, present, asking nothing, which was precisely what he needed, which was precisely what only she would have known to give. 3 weeks later, his father called him to that study. Old leather, a glass neither of them drank. He laid out the situation with the methodical clarity he used for things he considered matters of fact rather than feeling. The family name, the expectations attached to it, the kind of life those expectations required, and the kind that would complicate them. When he finished, Oliver said, "I understand what you're asking." "Good," his father said. "I'm not going to do it." He managed his surprise with composure. He named the consequences, the allowance, the arrangement about chambers, the house eventually. Precise, unemotional, thorough. Oliver said he understood. He drove back to Oxford and knocked on Eve's door at 10:30 that night. She opened it, read his face in 1 second, and said, "Come in." She made tea. He told her everything. When he finished, she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I didn't ask you to." "I know that too." She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had not seen on her before. Not gratitude. Eve had no time for gratitude that implied obligation, but something quieter and more serious. The specific recognition of being chosen by someone who understood the full cost of the choice and made it freely, without asking you to carry any part of the weight. "Oliver," she said, "yes, I'm going to make you very happy." A pause, and occasionally quite furious. "I know," he said. "Good," she said. "Drink your tea." They married the following June. A register office on a Tuesday morning, no family from his side, 2 friends each, the whole thing completed in 11 minutes, which Eve found deeply satisfying on grounds of efficiency. She wore her grandmother's ring on her right hand. She held Oliver's hand throughout with the firm, unhurried grip of a woman who knows exactly where she is and has no doubts about it. Lunch at a restaurant she had chosen and refused to apologize for. "We're only doing this once. We're doing it properly." They moved into a flat in East London, smaller than his father's study, unreliable boiler, neighbors with a dog that had strong views about midnight. Eve had a teaching stipend. Oliver had what he had earned, which was the beginning of understanding what earning actually meant. She was better at the difficulty than he was. She fixed things. She budgeted with precision and without complaint and without making him feel the considerable gap in his competence. "You'll learn," she said one evening, watching him stand with the evidence of a failed repair and the expression of a man encountering his own limitations for the first time. "You could have done that in 30 seconds. Yes, the next time you'll do it in 45. She was right. She was almost always right. After 3 months, he stopped finding this irritating and started finding it one of the most reliable things in his life. Those were, and this is said without qualification, without the softening lens of retrospect, the happiest months of his life. Not because nothing was difficult, because the difficulty had Eve in it, because he would come home to a kitchen that smelled of something cooking and find her at the table with her notebook and her 2 pens, and the focused expression she wore when a problem was almost solved. And she would look up and say something that picked up the thread of a conversation they had been having since October as though no time had passed at all. He understood for the first time at 26 years old, in a too small flat with an unreliable boiler, what it meant to be known. Not performed for, not managed, known. He had not understood, before Eve, that there was a difference. It was their second autumn together when he first noticed the tiredness. Not the ordinary tiredness of a full life and not enough sleep. The other kind. The kind that sits underneath everything and does not lift after rest. Eve would come home from teaching and sit on the sofa with her eyes closed for 10 minutes in the way you do when the body is asking for something that 10 minutes cannot give. She was paler some mornings, eating less. He noticed. He said nothing, because she had said nothing, because Eve was not a person you alarm before something was definite, because she had no patience for preemptive worry. But he noticed. And here is the thing about the noticing, the thing that matters. He told himself he was respecting her privacy, trusting her to tell him when there was something to tell, and perhaps that was part of it. But some part of him, the part that had always been better at comfort than courage, was also simply afraid to ask, because asking would make it real. There is a particular kind of love that protects itself by not looking directly at certain things. It is not a bad love, it is a human love. It is the love of a man who has been given something extraordinary and cannot quite bring himself to examine too closely whether it is as permanent as he needs it to be. He did not ask. Until one evening, a Wednesday, ordinary, the end of an ordinary week, Eve came home and sat down at the kitchen table with the particular stillness she had when something required the room to hold still around it. He looked at her face, and he knew. Before she said a single word, he knew, in the way you know the things you have been not knowing on purpose. She looked at him across the table. "I need to tell you something," she said. She told him everything. What it was, what the doctors had said, what it meant probably, what it meant possibly, which parts were certain and which were not. She had known for 4 days, had sat with it alone, read everything available, asked every question, arrived at the kitchen table, already knowing more than most people know after a month, because Eve believed that knowledge, however terrible, was always preferable to the dark. When she finished speaking, the kitchen was very quiet. He held her hands across the table. He looked at the woman he had married. He thought in the way that certain thoughts arrive not as words but as a complete and sudden certainty. I will be whatever this requires. Completely, unconditionally, whatever this requires. Tell me what you need, he said. She had thought about it, of course she had. She told him with the same precision she brought to everything she loved. She did not want to be treated as though she were already partly gone. She did not want careful voices or the suffocating tenderness that turns the person you love into a patient before they have consented to being one. She wanted her life, the full, complete, leaning forward version of it, for as long as it was available to her. I want you to keep choosing me, she said, the same way you always have, not the ill version. Me. Can you do that? He said yes. He meant it entirely. And Eve, this is what needs to be understood about her. This is the thing that distinguished her from most people who have ever been handed this particular piece of news. She did not fall apart. She did not perform grief or fear or any of the things that this moment would have entirely licensed. She went to work the next morning. She played piano that evening, not sadly, not symbolically, but because a student recital was 3 weeks away and the program was not going to prepare itself. She booked the restaurant for their anniversary dinner 6 weeks out, because she said if she was going to be exhausted, she would at least be exhausted somewhere with good food. She lived, deliberately, daily, without flinching, and he watched her do it and thought, he had never seen anything braver in his life. They went to the west of Ireland, to the cliffs in County Clare, where the Atlantic comes in off 3,000 miles of open water and hits the land with a force that makes you feel the size of things correctly. They walked the cliff path in October wind, and she held his arm and talked about the first time she had stood here, age 7, and understood the world was much larger than anyone had told her. Were you frightened? He asked. No, she said. I was relieved. They went to Edinburgh in winter. They went to a cottage in the Cotswolds, borrowed from a friend, where nothing happened. Walks, cooking, evenings by a fire, Eve playing keyboard in the corner while he read, and the nothing that happened was the fullest, most completely inhabited thing either of them had ever experienced. There was a night she fell asleep mid-sentence. They were in bed, and she was telling him about a student, 15 years old, had just understood something about counterpoint, the real electric excitement in Eve's voice describing the moment the girl had got it. And somewhere between one sentence and the next, the voice simply became sleep. She was there, and then she was entirely elsewhere, her breath slowing to the long, private rhythm of deep rest. He lay in the dark for a long time. He thought, this exact weight and warmth, this sound, this is what I would stay inside forever if the staying were mine to choose, even with everything, even knowing. He was the luckiest man alive. She said something to him once, on an evening when he had done what frightened people do, reached for sorry because it was the only thing available, the shapeless apology of a man who cannot fix what needs fixing. She put her hand on his face. You know the problem with sorry, she said. It's for the person saying it. Makes them feel better. does nothing for the person hearing it. Don't be sorry, just be here. He understood it then. He has understood it more completely every day since. The night before she died, he was with her. Her parents were there, her brothers, a few close friends who came and went. In the evening, it was just the two of them. She was not frightened. She was, as she had always been, entirely herself, precise and warm, and occasionally still funny in the way that made him laugh before he had decided to. She told him something quietly near the end of that evening. What she said is not part of this story. Some things belong only to the two people in the room, and to give them to anyone else, even with the best intentions, is to make them smaller. What she said to him in that room is his. He will carry it the rest of his life exactly as she gave it. She died on a Thursday morning in February, the kind of morning that performs complete indifference to what it contains. Ordinary light, ordinary cold, an ordinary Thursday, doing nothing to acknowledge that something extraordinary had just left the world. 3 days later, he was in her study, still in the same clothes, going through her desk, looking for her grandmother's ring, the one she had worn on her right hand, the one she had worn in that register office on a Tuesday morning 11 minutes before becoming his wife, the shallow drawer at the top of the desk, the one she had always kept locked, the one he had never once opened, not because he couldn't, but because she had asked him not to. And when Eve asked you for something, she asked it with a quiet certainty that made the word no feel structurally unsound. He found the key in her jewelry box. He stood there for a moment. He opened the drawer. The letter inside was from a consultant. It was addressed to Eve. It was dated the 14th of October. Eve and Oliver had met on the 17th. 3 days. She had received that letter, had sat in a doctor's office and been told, in the careful professional language used for dismantling futures, exactly what was happening inside her body and roughly how long she had. 3 days before she walked into that library. 3 days before she looked up at a man she had never met and told him to sit down or come back in an hour. He read the letter 4 times, not because he failed to understand it. He understood it completely on the first reading. He read it 4 times because understanding something and being able to hold it at the same time are not the same operation. The distance between them in this case required 4 attempts to cross. She knew. She knew on the day she said, sit down or come back in an hour. She knew every day he came back. She knew in that pub on the corner when they talked for 4 hours and she made him feel understood and accountable for the first time in his life. She knew in County Clare with her father's fiddle on the wall and her mother's cooking and the Atlantic audible in the dark. She knew in the car back from Wiltshire with her hand steady on his. She knew in that register office on a Tuesday morning, 11 minutes, her grandmother's ring. The firm, unhurried grip of a woman who knows exactly where she is. She knew every morning she woke up beside him. She knew every evening she played. She chose all of it anyway. And now, sitting on the floor of her study with the letter in his hands and the key still in his other hand, and the specific, unbearable clarity of a person who has just discovered that the story they thought they were living was a different and braver story than they knew. Now everything he had ever watched her do rearranged itself in his mind like light through a different lens. Why she never wasted a conversation. Why she told him exactly what she needed, always, without hedging or performance. As though unclear communication were a luxury she had consciously decided she could not afford. Why she had given herself to this love without the small held-back portion that most people keep in reserve. The careful partial investment that says not everything, not yet, not until I know it's safe. Eve had given everything. Immediately and without reservation. He had always thought this was simply who she was. It was who she was, and it was also a choice. A fully informed, eyes open, every single morning renewed choice. Then the question arrived, the one she had almost certainly anticipated, the one she had calculated before she even learned his name. The question that has not left him since. Would he have chosen her if he had known? He has turned that question over every day. He wants to give the honest answer, not the comfortable one. He doesn't know. He wants to say yes, immediately, completely, without qualification. He wants to say that love is large enough to choose itself under any conditions, and perhaps it is. Perhaps he would have sat down at that table anyway. But she knew him. She saw him clearly, quickly, entirely, in a way that took him considerably longer to see himself. And she understood that the version of him who walked into that library was not yet the man capable of making the choice she had already made. He was a man who had never truly chosen anything, who had never been required to, who would have heard the word diagnosis and responded with exactly the kind of careful, well-meaning retreat that would have closed the door before either of them could walk through it. So she did not tell him. She gave him 3 years to become someone capable of the choice she had made from the beginning. She built him patiently, precisely, with her particular focused moral seriousness, with 4 questions across a dinner table, in a pub on a corner, and a piano played twice in an empty room, into the man who could have chosen her from the start. And then she left before he could tell her he would have. His father came in April. He sat in Oliver's kitchen, and for a long time they sat in a silence that contained 30 years of distance. Then he looked at the 2 coffee cups on the table. He understood immediately. Something moved across his face. Not quite grief, not quite guilt, but the space between them. "She was right for you," he said. "I was wrong. Earlier than I admitted it. I knew it and chose the wrong thing anyway, because I had always chosen the wrong thing, and I didn't know how to stop." The most honest thing his father had ever said to him. Too late in every significant way. Still something. "She would have wanted me to tell you it's all right," Oliver said. "Is it?" his father asked. "No, but she would have wanted me to say so, because she understood that people need to be given the chance to do better, even when the time for it has run out. So on her behalf, it's all right." His father nodded, drank his tea, left 2 hours later and looked at the 2 cups on his way out and said nothing about them. That silence was its own kind of grace. He still makes 2 cups every morning. He sits down across from the second one. He drinks his. He tells her whatever he has been thinking. Some mornings important, some mornings entirely ordinary. The kind of daily detail that has nowhere to go when the person it belongs to is no longer there to receive it. She told him once that love means never having to say you're sorry. He spent a long time thinking he understood what she meant, that love perfects you, that when you truly love someone, you never do anything requiring forgiveness. He understands now what she actually meant. She meant, the person who loves you does not need the performance of your remorse. They do not need the staging of your guilt or the ritual apology that is really about making yourself feel better while calling it love. The person who loves you needs you to see clearly, to be present, to choose them again and again in the ordinary moments, when no one is watching and nothing is at stake, and it would be entirely easy to look away. That is what she was doing. Every morning for 3 years in a library, in a pub on a corner, in a kitchen in County Clare, in a register office on a Tuesday, in a flat in East London with an unreliable boiler, and a dog next door with opinions about midnight. She was choosing, fully, without reservation, with complete knowledge of what it would cost. Eve Callahan walked into a library 3 days after the worst news of her life. She sat down, she looked up, and she decided, not in a grand dramatic moment, not with anyone watching, not in a way that asked for credit or recognition or anything at all in return. She decided to love something completely, with full knowledge of what completely would cost, and she did it every single day for 3 years until she could not anymore. That is not an ordinary love story. That is the bravest thing one person has ever done for another. And somewhere, in a kitchen with 2 coffee cups on the table, a man is trying every single day to be worthy of it. Please like, share this video, and subscribe. See you in the next one. Thank you.